Hi, I'm Philip Briggs, the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness here at Ventura College, and I'm going to walk you through how to use the Faculty Course Success Rate dashboard. The data in this dashboard was originally provided to Faculty Academy participants as well as faculty participating in the Cultural Curriculum Audit and Review project. As part of President Hoffman's initiative on social justice, inclusion, diversity, and equity, the data is now being made available to all faculty members on campus. I'd like to also note that there's a number of professional development opportunities related to this initiative, and I encourage you to contact one of the faculty professional development leads on campus. You can find their email addresses at the bottom of the Start Here tab and at the bottom of the FAQs tab. That brings me to the first part of this walkthrough, which is noticing that there's tabs at the top of the page. These tabs are used to navigate around the dashboard. We're going to start on the My Data tab, which displays course success rate data in your classes over the past few semesters. What is the course success rate, you may be asking yourself? It's also known as a pass rate. It's the percentage of passing grades out of all grades assigned. The calculation does not include students who dropped the class prior to receiving a grade. However, it does include students who dropped the class after the drop date and received a W in the class. If you're interested in the math behind this calculation, I'll go over it in detail at the end of the video. Once we're on this page, you'll see a graph with course success rates in your class by different student demographic groups. I don't teach here, so this is just some fake data I created for illustrative purposes. You can use these drop downs at the top of the page to select different semesters, different courses, as well as view data for different demographic groups like gender, ethnicity, etc. When you start looking at the data, you'll probably be wondering what these numbers actually mean. Are these numbers high? Are these numbers low? What about this big difference between these two groups, for example? For under 20-year-olds in my fake VO2 class, for example, have an 85% success rate, while 25 to 29-year-olds in my fake VO2 class have a 65.2 course success rate. There's a couple places to look to get some additional context in what these numbers actually mean. The first is to take a look at the proportionality index, or the PI value for these different groups. To see that, you'll scroll down to below the graph here to this table. The proportionality index, or the PI, is a metric that was developed by the USC Center for Urban Education to measure equity gaps. In a nutshell, the further this number is below 1.0, the larger the equity gap. So you can see for my 25 to 29-year-olds, this PI value is 0.83, which indicates that there's a moderate gap for that group. If you're interested in the math behind the proportionality index, I'll also run through it in detail at the end of the video. The other place to get some context on the numbers in your classes is by looking at the overall success rates for this course, for this discipline, or for the college as a whole. To find those, you'll scroll back up to the top of the page and click on the VC Data tab. Just as in the My Data tab, you can use these drop-down menus at the top of the page to select what discipline, course, and/or demographics you're interested in seeing data for. You can also scroll down to the bottom of the page to see proportionality index values as well. And that's basically all there is to it. If you have additional follow-up questions about what the data means, why the rates may be lower or higher for certain groups, or how to incorporate culturally relevant teaching strategies into your class, I strongly suggest that you contact one of our faculty professional development leads. You can find their contact information at the bottom of the FAQ tab here. Also, one last note about who has access to the data. Nobody else can see the data for your classes. Your data is associated with your VCCD login, and you're the only person who can log in and see your course success rate data in the My Data tab. However, all faculty can view the data contained in the VC Data tab. If you have additional questions about data access, calculations, etc., please feel free to give me a call or email me at pbriggs@vccd.edu. The last thing I'm going to do in this video is run through the math behind the course success rate calculation as well as proportionality index calculation. For all of my fellow nerds who would like to follow along with me, feel free to stick around. For everyone else, please give me a call if you have any questions or send me an email. First, I'm going to run through the course success rate calculation. I put together just some fake data here real quick to illustrate and use as an example. So let's pretend that we've got a total of 7,987 grades that were assigned to students at VC in a given semester, and 6,179 of those grades were passing grades. So these are grades of A, B, C, or P. So to calculate our success rate for the college as a whole, we would just divide the successful grade number by the total grade assigned number. And we'd come up with 77.3% course success rate. Let me just convert this to a percentage, or 77.4% success rate. We can do the same thing for each of these different demographic groups. So if we calculated this, we'll just drag our formula up. We can see here in our fake data that females have an 86% course success rate, which again is just this 4123 divided by 4757. Males have a 63.4% success rate, and students with an unreported gender have a 74% course success rate. To calculate the proportionality index, there's 3 steps. The first step is to calculate the percentage of total grades assigned by each of these groups. So for our success rate calculation, we calculated percentages across the rows, but for the first step of our proportionality index calculation, we're actually going to calculate percentages across the columns. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell us, out of all the total grades assigned, what percentage of those total grades were assigned to females, what percentage were assigned to males, and to unreported. So to calculate that, we're just going to first divide this 4757 by our total, which is 7987. Do the same thing for males and our unreported students. Convert these to percentage. And so you can see that out of all the grades that were assigned in this term or year, 59.6% of the total grades were assigned to females, 39.5% of the total grades were assigned to males, and 1% of the total grades were assigned to students with an unreported gender. So next we're going to do that same calculation for the successful grades so that we can see what percentage of the successful grades were assigned to each one of these groups as well. So we'll do the 4123 here by the total of the successful grades, which is 6179. Do the same thing for males and for unreported students. Convert these to percentages. Now this is showing us that out of all the successful grades that were assigned, 66.7% of the successful grades were assigned to females, 32.4% of successful grades were assigned to males, and about 1%, 0.9% of the successful grades were assigned to students with an unreported gender. So the final step is to calculate our PI value, which is the ratio between these two numbers. So we're basically going to be comparing the percentage of students who are in our starting group to the percentage of our successful students, and then coming up with a ratio value. So to do that, we're just going to divide our successful grades by our total grades assigned. Format these to a number. And then we'll run our calculation down. So if there were no equity gap at all, the PI value would be exactly 1.0. And the reason for this is because in this case, we'll take a look at the males. In this case, 39.5% of all the grades were assigned to males. And so if there were no equity gap at all, we would expect that 39.5% of the successful grades were assigned to males, which would mean that this PI value would be dividing, here I'll just do it here real quick. We would be dividing 39.5 by 39.5, and we get exactly 1.0. Let's undo. However, in this example, we're saying that only 32.4% of the successful grades were assigned to males, whereas males made up 39.5% of the total student population. So this value is less than 1.0. The further this PI value is below 1.0, the larger the discrepancy between these two percentages. So for example, we could change this to like 17%, and we get a PI value of 43. The Center for Urban Education at USC has basically pioneered this metric and has come up with cutoff values for different levels of equity gaps. So if you find that this proportionality index is between 0.99 and 0.86, we would say there's a mild equity gap. If it's between 0.85 and 0.71, we'd say there's a moderate equity gap. And anything less than a 0.71 is a major equity gap. So if we go back to our Excel file here, we can see this proportionality index for males in this case is a 0.82, which would be associated with a moderate equity gap. For all my statisticians and mathematicians watching this video, I know this isn't the most rigorous statistical method for determining whether there's a difference between groups on a given metric. However, this method's one that's been used throughout the California community college system because it's fairly easy to calculate and it's also pretty easy to interpret. If you have any additional questions on this metric or any of the calculations, please feel free to send me an email. Again, my name is Philip Briggs, and my email address is pbriggs@vccd.edu, which you can also find at the bottom of the FAQ page here.